Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Gunnison and welcome back to Spinning the Tires. A little bit of a different video format this week. Been very busy, so I'm not going to have time to make a race preview and review this week because I'll also be working on a couple other special videos soon. So this is both the race review for the Bushy McBush Race 400 and also the preview for the Goodyear 400 at Darlington this Sunday. So let's dive right into what happened at Kansas first. Okay, so Kansas, the Bushy McBush race, most interesting race name ever, was indeed an interesting race. Brad Keselowski dominated most of the first stage. Kyle Busch wound up winning that stage. Kyle Larson dominated and won the second stage of the race, but those were both largely uneventful stages. It was the third stage of the race that was really when all chaos broke loose and things got messy. So with about, I want to say 50, 60 to go, I don't remember exactly when, but there were green flag pit stops going on, and it was the final cycle of the day, and Tyler Reddick's pit crew lost a tire on pit road. It rolled out across pit road and into the infield grass, and it just sat there for about 30 laps. NASCAR usually calls the caution for that kind of thing when you got a tire that's uncontrolled and is rolled out into the racing area. But they didn't call a caution for this. Reasons for it, they said, were they didn't want to interfere with the racing at the time because not everybody had cycled through and done their green flag pit stops. Now that's a reasonable argument at first because you don't want, if you make that call and just throw the caution right then, that completely shakes up the running order, and people that were ahead are going to be behind, and people that were behind are ahead now because of their pit strategy. At the same time, pit strategy is just part of NASCAR and what it's all about. But at first it seems like a reasonable argument, but the more you look into it, the more it's like, I don't know about that call. Because really, they were waiting until the last car to not pit yet made their pit stop. So essentially, the person who hadn't pitted, which at the time was leader Chris Buescher, Chris Buescher and his crew chief could basically decide when that caution came out by just deciding when they pitted, because as soon as they pitted was pretty much when NASCAR was going to throw the caution. And this is where there was some weird judgment that came in, because after he made the pit stop, NASCAR indicated that they weren't going to throw the caution after all, and that it wasn't an immediate hazard. Yet about 5-10 laps later, they did call the caution for it. My problem with that is either it's a hazard to the racing or it isn't a hazard to the racing. Either you throw the caution right away or you don't put out the yellow flag at all. I think you gotta make a decision right then. As soon as that tire rolls out, you gotta say, okay, are we going green or are we gonna bring them under yellow so we can go get that tire? And NASCAR made a very confusing decision on that. And I don't know, people want to say it's manipulating the race. I think NASCAR kind of called that when they did to avoid manipulating it too much with the pit cycle. But ultimately, I've seen NASCAR screw up cautions before, but this one, it was something else. It's one of those things that just doesn't sit right, because it's like, why did they make the call when they did? Because that tire out there, there's an extremely low chance anybody would spin out and hit it, but it's a 1 in a million chance. But it could happen, and if they did, it'd be a safety hazard. So I don't know what NASCAR's judgment was on it was not a hazard and then it was. Like, is it or isn't it? Make a decision. So that's my little rant about that. Yeah, not the greatest decision. But anyway, after that, I think there were 20 laps to go in the race. We got our restarts. And restarts with this mile-and-a-half package are the craziest you'll ever see. So they got going on the restart, and they were racing through turn 2, getting up to speed, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Austin Cindric, who was making his 5th Cup start this weekend, both crashed. pretty badly mangling both of those cars. And Cindric actually rebounded to finish 22nd, but not good for either one of those guys. So that brought out the caution, which led to another caution. When they went for the next restart, they were coming around turn 4. Christopher Bell got loose. He turned down into Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Stenhouse, unfortunately, involved in 2 wrecks this week. That only one of them was debatably his fault. He really didn't deserve to be out of the race. But that knocked his car out, blew the engine. He couldn't continue on. Bell also, his uncontrollable car spun up the track and hit Stenhouse's teammate Ryan Preece as well. So it was not a good day for their team at JTG Doherty Racing. So hope they're able to rebound a bit next week at Darlington. So then they came to the final restart, and this was just insane. They went down into the first corner, Ryan Blaney and Kyle Larson pushing to the lead, but then Larson hooked Ryan Blaney's back bumper and sent him around sideways. Blaney managed to save it. It was one of the best saves I've seen in recent memory. It was absolutely incredible. But yeah, that didn't bring out a caution because he was able to save it, but it absolutely ruined his chances. Blaney was in the lead with just 2 laps to go, and he wound up finishing 21st. So insane turn of events there. But they continued on, going down to the final lap, and once they got to the final lap, the top 4 or 5 was just beaten doors, and just, I think Brad Keselowski and Chase Elliott both got into the wall on the backstretch. It was just a demolition derby. People just all over each other trying to get the win. But ultimately, the guy that won was not the one who was involved in any of the crashing. He was the guy that kept his car clean all day, and that would be Kyle Busch. Busch winning the Bushy McBusch race. Pretty funny coincidence. Maybe not a coincidence. Is it rigged? I don't think so. But it's pretty funny that a Busch won the Bushy McBusch race. So, I guess now, do we call him Kyle Bushy McBusch? Maybe. But anyway, a good win for him. That's only the second win he's had in the past 2 years. It's been a rough couple seasons for him. I'm not a fan of his at all. I've historically not been a fan of his, but it was cool to see a Busch win this race. And it was good for him. I mean, even for someone I don't like, I can only imagine how it feels to go on such a long winless drought. So good for him. And he was racing a pretty cool car too, the M&M's Mix Toyota Camry. But yeah, with that, there are a few other notable finishes. Matt DiBenedetto got 4th, making this only the first time in his career that he's got consecutive top 5 finishes. Austin Cindric put up a strong effort of 22nd, and Austin Dillon, for the first time in his career, got 3 top 10s in a row. So now let's talk about Darlington, the upcoming race this weekend. This is going to be NASCAR's throwback race. Each year NASCAR goes to Darlington for their throwback, their annual event. Normally it's in the Southern 500, which is in the late summer, but for this year they actually added a second Darlington race to the schedule. So this year instead, throwback weekend will be at the Goodyear 400, which is this weekend. And it's going to be a great race. I think the 550 horsepower package they've been using for mile and a halves has not performed the greatest at Darlington in years past. So NASCAR went up to the 750 horsepower package they use for short tracks for Darlington. So the racing might be a little better. It'll be a little higher horsepower. It'll be fun. But all of the cars that have been unveiled so far look beautiful. Next week I'll be reviewing each one of the paint schemes and ranking them. And it should be a fun race. Darlington, for the most part, is a one-groove racetrack, and it's an interesting groove. The turns there are very unique. But for the most part, it's a one-groove racetrack, but there's still plenty of room to pass. It's one of the oldest NASCAR tracks, constructed back in the 1950s, I think. As for who wins, I want to say Chase Elliott. That was my prediction for last week. It wasn't quite correct, but I think he'll become the 11th different winner this year. He is the defending Cup champion. He's got to win at some point. It's going to be fun. High speeds, high horsepower, kind of just what you love to see. And speaking of high speed, NASCAR's next gen car is being unveiled tomorrow, Wednesday, May 5th, at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be 1 p.m. where I live. Be sure to go tune in on NASCAR's website, NASCAR's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter pages. They have it all over. It's a huge event. Toyota, Ford, and Chevy will all be unveiling their new versions of the NASCAR. I saw a video today on some of the technical aspects of this car. I'll review those at some point, and it's looking to be a pretty different handling race car. I know a lot of people in the tests have talked about how it's much harder to drive, which is something NASCAR fans want to see. A car that's harder to drive means more work for the driver, and the pure talent will rise to the top. I'm looking forward to it because I think this could be the saving grace for NASCAR as far as going back to stock roots. Now it's not a perfect stock car, but it's closer, and if they can have some of the elements of your everyday car in more prevalent in the NASCAR itself, and the racing is good, I think they've got themselves a success. So I'm extremely excited for that. So yeah, it's looking to be a fun weekend. I will be back next week with you all to review the Darlington paint schemes. I'll also be making a video at some point on my analysis of the next gen car. Very detailed look at what we see in tomorrow's unveil. So until then, have a great week, great weekend, and enjoy the Darlington Goodyear 400 and all the wonderful throwback paint schemes that come with it. So I will see you next week. This is Gunnison signing off with Spinning the Tires.